Ethan had always been drawn to silence. The city with its roaring traffic, bright lights, and endless chatter never felt like home. So, he had chosen the woods. A small cabin stood among the trees, far from neighbors or roads, with a little garden out front and a stream winding nearby. It was the perfect place for someone who wanted to think, to observe, and to live at his own pace. He had built it himself, using wood he had carefully selected, and every corner carried the mark of his work. There was something comforting about living in a space where every nail, every plank, and every window had been placed by his own hands. Ethan's mornings were always the same. He would wake up just as the sun began to stretch its rays across the forest floor. Birds would sing, and the air carried the scent of pine, damp earth, and moss. He liked to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the light filter through the trees. Sometimes, deer would wander close, and he would remain perfectly still, letting them move as if he were not even there. He had grown used to the rhythm of life in the woods, the way the wind whispered, the way the leaves trembled when small animals passed, and the way the sun shifted shadows across the cabin walls. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Ethan noticed something strange. A small branch had been bent toward the ground, and the soil beneath it looked as though it had been pressed by feet but not his own. He paused, puzzled, scanning the surrounding forest. Nothing stirred. Perhaps it was an animal, he thought. Squirrels often left marks like this. Still, he could not shake the feeling that someone or something had been there. Shaking his head, he dismissed it, telling himself that the woods had their own ways of playing tricks on lonely minds. Life continued much the same after that. Ethan tended his garden, planting tomatoes, carrots, and a few flowers that added color to the green. He read books he had collected over the years, sometimes staying up late into the night with a lantern, reading about faraway lands, ancient civilizations, or the stars that shone above his cabin. At times, he would sketch birds, squirrels, or the way the sunlight fell on a tree trunk. These sketches were not for anyone else, but they gave him a sense of connection to the living world around him. Yet, the feeling of being watched never entirely went away. Occasionally, he thought he saw a flicker among the trees, a movement that was too deliberate to be a deer or a rabbit. Once, a small object, a smooth stone he had placed by the porch, was gone when he returned from fetching water. Another time, his favorite mug, which he always kept in the same spot on the table, had shifted just a little. He began to notice patterns. A bent branch here, a footprint there, a soft rustling that did not belong to wind or animals. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ethan was sitting by the window, sipping tea. He heard a faint sound, almost like humming, carried by the wind. It was soft, melodic, and strangely comforting. He froze, listening carefully. The sound did not resemble anything he had heard in nature before. Curious rather than afraid, he stepped outside, scanning the trees with the last of the sunlight fading behind him. For a moment, he saw a flicker of light that darted between the trunks. He blinked, thinking it must be fireflies, but the movement was deliberate, purposeful, and intelligent, in a way that fireflies were not. He squinted, trying to see more clearly, but the glow vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Something was out there. He did not know what it was, but he could feel it watching, observing, perhaps learning. The days that followed were filled with little mysteries. A freshly picked apple appeared on the porch one morning, though he had not been near any apple trees. His sketches sometimes seemed altered, as though someone had added subtle touches while he was away. The feeling of being watched became almost comforting, a quiet presence that made the woods feel alive in a new way. Ethan found himself talking to it, narrating his day, or sharing observations about the changing seasons. It was as if he were no longer entirely alone. One rainy afternoon, Ethan noticed a shadow moving just beyond the edge of his garden. The rain made everything blurry, but the figure was there, still and watching. Ethan's first reaction was caution. He had lived in the woods long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. Still, he could sense that there was no danger. He remembered the humming from the other evening, and the small, unexplainable gifts. Whoever or whatever this was, it seemed to be curious, not harmful. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's routine began to include this unseen observer. He would leave small objects outside. A carved wooden bird, a neatly tied bundle of herbs, or sketches of the forest creatures. The next day, something would appear in return. Sometimes it was a luminous stone, smooth and warm, that seemed to glow faintly even in daylight. Other times, delicate patterns were traced in the soil near his cabin. Intricate designs that made no sense to him but held a strange beauty. Ethan began to feel a bond with this presence. He imagined it learning from him, trying to understand the world of humans, perhaps even sharing its own knowledge in ways he could not yet comprehend. At night, he would lie awake, listening to the forest, wondering who or what was out there, and what it was thinking. The mystery became a companion, filling the silence he had once cherished but now found lonely. One evening, as twilight settled over the cabin, Ethan decided to be brave. He stepped out into the clearing, holding a small lantern high. "I see you," he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're there. You don't have to hide." He waited, his heart pounding. A soft glow appeared among the trees, flickering like a pulse. The glow moved closer, deliberate and slow. For the first time, Ethan could make out the shape of a figure tall, slender, and not quite human. Ethan froze. The figure did not advance further, but it did not retreat. It seemed as curious about him as he was about it. For a long moment, they simply regarded one another. Two beings sharing the same space, separated by mystery, and yet connected by an unspoken understanding. Ethan felt no fear, only wonder. Here, in the quiet of the woods, he had found something extraordinary, something beyond the ordinary rhythms of life he had once known. The figure vanished before he could take a closer look, leaving behind a small, feather-like object that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. Ethan picked it up, marveling at its texture and glow. He did not know what it was or where it had come from, but he felt certain it was a gift, a sign of recognition, of communication. He held it close, a promise of connection that transcended words. From that night onward, Ethan's life in the cabin was no longer solitary. Every day held a quiet excitement, a sense of anticipation. He began to look forward to the subtle signs, the gifts, and the glimpses of the unknown figure among the trees. He began to imagine its thoughts, its curiosity, and its quiet admiration for the world he inhabited. In the vastness of the forest, Ethan realized that living alone had never meant being lonely. Sometimes, the most profound connections were formed in silence, in patience, and in the shared wonder of two beings simply observing each other. Ethan continued his daily routines, tending his garden, sketching, and reading. But now he spoke aloud more often, as if the presence could hear him. He shared his thoughts, his dreams, and his small triumphs, finding joy in the simple act of expression. And in return, he began to notice changes in the forest, small patterns, subtle movements, and the occasional gift that seemed to respond to his own. It was a quiet companionship, unlike anything he had known, and it filled the cabin with a sense of life far greater than solitude alone could offer. The forest seemed to hum with possibility, and Ethan felt a thrill in knowing that he was part of something larger, something mysterious and beautiful. The unknown figure, whoever it was, had turned his quiet retreat into a world of wonder, teaching him that even in isolation, there was room for friendship, curiosity, and connection. And as he stood on the porch one morning, watching the sunlight dance through the leaves, Ethan smiled. The woods had grown richer, deeper, and full of life he could never have imagined. All because he had chosen to live quietly, and because someone, somewhere, had chosen to watch him, not with harm, but with curiosity and wonder. Ethan could not stop thinking about the strange figure in the woods. The feather-like gift she had left behind glowed faintly on his table, filling the cabin with a soft light even as the evening darkened. Every so often, he would pick it up, turning it gently in his hands, marveling at its smoothness and the way it seemed almost alive. He had no idea who or what was leaving these gifts, but curiosity filled him with a sense of excitement he had not felt in years. The forest was no longer simply a place to live in quiet. It had become a place of mystery and wonder. The following morning, Ethan went about his routine, but with a new sense of anticipation. He tended to his garden more carefully, arranging the vegetables and flowers neatly, as if the unseen figure might notice. He left small offerings outside, not fully knowing why, but feeling instinctively that this was a way to communicate. A neatly stacked pile of pebbles, a sketch of the stream flowing through the woods, and a small, carved wooden bird rested near the edge of the clearing. He stepped back, watching, hoping for some response. Days passed with small, subtle signs that the presence was watching. Pebbles were rearranged. The carved bird appeared on the porch, and one morning, a glowing stone lay on the table inside his cabin. Ethan marveled at it, holding it close and noticing patterns etched on its surface. They seemed random at first, but he soon realized they shifted and moved slightly when he turned the stone. It was as if the object itself were alive, responding to him in some way. The more he observed, the more Ethan realized that whoever was watching him was intelligent, careful, and gentle. No damage was ever done. Nothing was ever stolen. The figure seemed to move like a shadow, never stepping on plants, never disturbing his belongings in any harmful way. And yet, her presence was undeniable. Sometimes, when he paused to watch the trees, he thought he could see a faint glow weaving between the branches, always just out of reach. One morning, Ethan decided to take a small step forward. He placed a carefully drawn sketch of the forest on a tree stump, leaving it where the figure could see it clearly. The sketch was simple, showing the stream, his cabin, and the surrounding trees. Then, he stepped back and waited. He spent the day tending to the garden, trying not to glance at the sketch. Though his curiosity was almost unbearable, by evening, he returned to the stump and noticed something new. A small, delicate pattern had been added around his sketch, as though someone had traced lines with glowing ink. It formed a frame of light that shimmered faintly in the last rays of sunlight. Ethan's heart raced. He knew now that the figure was intelligent and perhaps trying to communicate. He smiled, feeling a strange connection, even though he had never seen her clearly. Over the following weeks, their communication grew. Ethan left messages in the form of sketches, small wooden objects, or carefully arranged stones. In return, he received glowing objects, patterns in the soil, and tiny, intricate marks that seemed to carry meaning. He began to anticipate these responses, checking the areas where he left items each day. Sometimes, the gifts would appear immediately. Other times, they would wait for several hours, or even overnight. It was as if the figure had her own schedule, observing him, learning, and choosing when to respond. Ethan began to notice her movements more clearly. The figure moved with grace and patience, always careful not to startle him. He never saw her face fully, only glimpses of light that suggested a form humanoid in shape, but unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin seemed to glow faintly in the dark, and she moved silently, her presence both mysterious and comforting. He wondered what she looked like up close, what she thought, and how she understood the world. One night, as he lay in bed, Ethan heard the soft humming again. It was faint, melodic, and almost musical. He followed the sound outside, lantern in hand, moving carefully so as not to disturb anything. The glow appeared between the trees, closer than it had ever been. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He could see her more clearly now, tall and slender, her movements flowing like water. Her skin shimmered faintly, reflecting the lantern's light, and her eyes, though distant, seemed filled with curiosity. Ethan did not speak at first. He simply watched her, trying to convey through stillness that he meant no harm. To his relief, she did not retreat. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if observing him with the same careful attention he had shown her. For the first time, he felt a direct connection, a silent understanding that passed between them without words. It was strange, comforting, and thrilling all at once. From that night onward, their interactions grew bolder. Ethan began leaving small objects for her more deliberately: a carved wooden fox, a bundle of dried herbs, or sketches of animals in the forest. She responded with gifts of her own: luminous stones, delicate feather-like objects, and subtle patterns in the soil. Ethan began to realize that she was not just watching him, she was participating in a shared world of curiosity, learning, and mutual respect. The figure's gifts began to take on new forms. One evening, Ethan discovered a small object shaped like a leaf, glowing faintly with shifting colors. When he held it, he felt a warmth that seemed to communicate a sense of calm. Another time, a pattern appeared in the snow outside his cabin, intricate and precise, depicting the stars and trees around him. He traced the lines with his fingers, feeling a strange joy in recognizing the care and thought behind it. Ethan's imagination soared. He wondered where she came from, what her world was like, and what she knew about the universe. The cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a bridge between two worlds, one human, one unknown, and yet both curious and eager to connect. He began to speak aloud more often, as if sharing thoughts directly with her. His dreams, his memories, and his simple joys. Though he could not hear a response in words, the patterns, gifts, and glowing lights seemed to answer him in their own language. The seasons began to change. Autumn arrived with crisp air, fallen leaves, and the smell of damp earth. Ethan noticed the figure moving among the trees more frequently, sometimes appearing in the morning mist, sometimes leaving subtle signs in the garden or on the path. He began to leave small surprises for her, arranging them in ways that might convey messages: a circle of pebbles to show the sun, a carved bird to share a story, or sketches of the animals she had observed with him. One afternoon, a gentle rain fell. Ethan watched through the window as she appeared in the distance, standing among the trees, her form luminous against the gray sky. The rain made her glow even more, casting reflections on the wet leaves. He stepped outside, holding up a carved wooden star as an offering. The figure approached, slowly, carefully, and accepted it not with hands, but with a light that seemed to envelop the object and lift it into the air. Ethan felt a shiver of awe. It was the closest they had come to a true exchange, a silent conversation filled with trust and curiosity. The forest, once quiet and predictable, now seemed alive with possibility. Ethan realized that this connection had changed him. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before: the way a leaf trembled in the wind, the patterns of sunlight on the forest floor, the songs of birds that varied from day to day. The figure had taught him, without intending to, that life was not simply about survival or solitude. It was about observation, understanding, and connection. Ethan began to leave small paths for her to follow, arranging stones or carving shapes in the soil. Each time, he felt a thrill as he imagined her observing them, learning, responding, and each time, she did, leaving patterns of glowing light that told him, without words, that she understood, that she cared, and that she was as curious about him as he was about her. Night after night, Ethan would lie awake, listening to the hum of the forest, the rustle of leaves, and the faint glow that sometimes appeared in the darkness. He imagined her thoughts, her curiosity, and her wonder at a world so different from her own. And he realized that he no longer felt truly alone. He had found companionship, understanding, and a connection that transcended words, species, or even the limits of human imagination. Ethan smiled as he drifted to sleep, the glowing feather resting on his table. The figure in the woods had taught him something he could never have learned in isolation: that connection, understanding, and curiosity were powerful forces, capable of bridging even the greatest divides. And in the quiet of the forest, under the stars and the gentle rustling of trees, he felt a sense of joy, wonder, and anticipation for the days to come, knowing that each new morning might bring another message, another gift, another step in a friendship that had begun in silence, but was growing in the light of understanding. Ethan woke to the soft sound of birdsong filtering through the trees. The morning air was crisp, and sunlight poured through the cabin window, casting golden patterns on the wooden floor. He stretched and glanced at the glowing feather on the table. It was still there, shimmering faintly as though it had been waiting for him. A quiet excitement filled him. Today, he thought, might be different. Something in the forest felt alive in a new way, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. He stepped outside and felt the cool grass beneath his feet. The morning dew clung to the leaves and sparkled in the sunlight. Ethan began his usual walk along the forest path, breathing deeply, feeling the calm of the woods wrap around him. But today, he noticed more signs than usual: small disturbances in the soil, patterns of twigs carefully arranged, and faint glowing lights weaving between the trunks. He smiled, knowing the figure had been near. He decided to leave a small gift today, something thoughtful. From his cabin, he fetched a bundle of fresh herbs, a carved wooden fox he had made during a quiet evening, and a small sketch of the stream that flowed past the cabin. Carefully, he arranged them in a small clearing, placing the fox in the center, the herbs in a circle around it, and the sketch leaning against a tree. He stepped back and waited, curiosity bubbling in his chest. Hours passed. Ethan tended to his garden and watered the plants, occasionally glancing toward the clearing. Late in the afternoon, a soft glow appeared among the trees. The figure moved closer, flowing as though the forest itself guided her steps. Ethan felt a rush of wonder and delight. She paused at the edge of the clearing, her luminous eyes observing the arrangement he had made. Slowly, she reached out with a hand that seemed to shimmer with light. Instead of taking anything, she lifted the fox gently, rotated it in the air, and set it back down, slightly shifted. Then she extended a glowing fingertip toward the sketch, tracing delicate lines around the trees and stream. The sketch now glimmered with subtle colors that Ethan had never used. He gasped softly. She was adding her own touch, communicating without words, showing appreciation, and perhaps even creating a dialogue. Ethan stepped forward carefully, not wanting to frighten her. "I like it," he said softly. "Thank you." He did not expect her to reply, but the glow around her deepened slightly, pulsing as though in acknowledgement. The moment was quiet but profound. It was the first time he felt a true exchange, a recognition of thought and care between him and the figure. Over the following weeks, their interaction deepened. Ethan left more complex sketches, arranging stones and twigs into patterns that might tell stories. The figure responded with glowing marks, subtle alterations, and gifts of luminous objects that seemed almost magical. One evening, she left a tiny plant, unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its leaves glimmered faintly, changing colors with the light. He placed it on his windowsill, fascinated, and realized that she was sharing pieces of her world, inviting him to understand her perspective. Ethan began to experiment with ways to communicate more clearly. He drew simple symbols, representing the sun, the moon, and the forest. In return, she left patterns that echoed his symbols but added new elements, lines, shapes, and glimmers of light he had never imagined. He realized she was not merely observing, she was teaching, offering a window into her own way of understanding the world. One afternoon, Ethan heard a soft hum that carried through the trees. It was different from before, a series of tones that seemed almost like a song. He followed the sound, lantern in hand, and found her standing near the stream. She extended a glowing hand toward him, then toward the water, as if inviting him to understand the rhythm she was creating. Ethan dipped his fingers into the stream, feeling the cool water ripple, and he realized she was teaching him to sense patterns in the natural world, the flow of water, the movement of light, and the harmony of the forest. Days turned into weeks, and their trust grew stronger. Ethan learned to read her gestures, the pulse of her glow, and the patterns she created. She learned to respond to his sketches, gifts, and small arrangements. Through this shared dialogue, a deep connection blossomed, one built on curiosity, respect, and wonder. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had thought he was alone in the world, but now he understood that companionship could take many forms, even beyond words and species. He began to share more than just objects. He told her stories of his life, of the city he had left behind, of friends and family he missed, and of moments of joy and sorrow. Though she could not speak, she seemed to understand, responding with patterns of light and subtle gestures that conveyed emotion and recognition. Sometimes, she created shapes that mirrored the feelings he expressed, capturing laughter, curiosity, and even quiet sadness. Ethan realized that this exchange was teaching him more than he could have imagined. He noticed things in the forest he had never seen before. The way leaves twisted in the wind, how shadows changed shape with the sunlight, the intricate paths that animals created. She was teaching him to observe with patience, to see the details, and to find beauty in the smallest things. In turn, he shared his human ways, creating tools, arranging objects, and building simple machines that could carry water or help the garden grow. She watched intently, glowing softly, absorbing every detail. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan set up a small fire outside the cabin. The figure appeared, watching the flames flicker, her glow reflecting in the light. Ethan sat quietly, speaking softly, telling her stories of the stars, of constellations, and of the wonders of the universe he had read about in books. She listened, moving closer, and for a moment, he felt as if the entire forest had grown silent, waiting to hear the words of two beings from different worlds, sharing understanding. Ethan realized that through their connection, he was learning patience, empathy, and the importance of observation. The figure, in turn, seemed fascinated by human creativity, resilience, and emotion. She moved with a grace that spoke of intelligence and care, and he began to see patterns in her movements that mirrored thought and curiosity. He wondered what her home might be like, what her people valued, and how she had come to find him in the forest. As autumn deepened, their companionship grew even more intricate. Ethan started leaving puzzles for her arrangements of stones and twigs that formed shapes resembling animals, stars, and rivers. She responded with glowing lines that completed the patterns, added new symbols, and sometimes even shifted his arrangements subtly to show him alternative ways of seeing. It was a silent game, a dance of curiosity and learning, and both of them delighted in it. One evening, a strong wind swept through the forest. Ethan worried about the cabin and his garden, but he noticed her presence guiding him. She appeared near the path, glowing faintly, and seemed to indicate a safer route for him to move his plants and belongings. He followed her guidance, amazed at the careful attention she paid. It was a small act, but it deepened his admiration. She was not just observing, she cared. Ethan began to anticipate her visits, leaving items in more thoughtful arrangements and reflecting on what he could share next. In return, her gifts became more intricate, glowing stones that formed constellations, delicate patterns in the soil, and objects that seemed almost alive with light. They were teaching each other, learning in silence, and finding joy in the shared discovery of the world around them. One night, as he lay awake, Ethan thought about the journey they had taken together. He realized that the presence had changed him in ways he could not have imagined. He saw the forest not as a place of solitude, but as a world full of life, connection, and wonder. He understood that curiosity, patience, and creativity were not just traits of humans. They were bridges to understanding, even across species and worlds. He smiled, thinking about the glow that appeared each evening, the gentle patterns, and the silent conversations. He realized that friendship could exist in forms beyond words, beyond touch, and even beyond knowing. It could exist in curiosity, in observation, and in the shared joy of learning and exploring. And in that realization, Ethan felt a deep sense of happiness. The figure in the woods had taught him more than he could have learned alone. She had shown him the value of patience, the beauty in detail, and the wonder of connection. And as he drifted into sleep, he thought of the days to come, knowing that each one would bring new lessons, new surprises, and new expressions of understanding between two beings from worlds apart, united by curiosity, kindness, and the quiet joy of shared discovery. Ethan woke to the gentle sound of the stream, sunlight streaming through the trees and warming the cabin. He stretched, feeling a quiet excitement in his chest. The forest no longer felt like a place of solitude. It had become a living, breathing world, full of mystery, wonder, and friendship. He glanced at the glowing feather on the table, still shimmering faintly, and smiled. Today, he felt, might be the day he and the figure would share something more than just gifts and patterns. He stepped outside, the crisp morning air brushing against his face. The forest was alive with sounds, birds singing, leaves rustling in the wind, and small animals scurrying through the undergrowth. Yet, amid all this life, he felt a calm certainty that she was nearby. He carried a small bundle of offerings with him, a carved wooden rabbit, a sketch of the forest at sunset, and a collection of colorful stones arranged in a spiral. He set them carefully in the clearing, arranging each item with thought and care. Hours passed, the sunlight slowly shifting through the trees. Ethan tended to his garden and sketched in his notebook, but he kept glancing toward the clearing. Then, just as the afternoon light grew soft and golden, a familiar glow appeared between the trees. The figure moved closer, flowing gracefully like a shadow in the sunlight. Ethan's heart quickened. Today, he felt, would be a step further in their connection. She approached the offerings, her glowing eyes observing everything carefully. She picked up the carved rabbit, turning it in her hands, and set it down gently, as if adding her own thought to the arrangement. Then she extended her glowing hand toward the spiral of stones. The stones shifted subtly, forming new shapes, patterns that seemed to tell a story Ethan could almost understand. He watched, fascinated, realizing she was teaching him a new way to see the world, a way that blended her knowledge and his human perspective. Ethan stepped closer, speaking softly. "I want you to understand me," he said. "I want to share my world, just as you share yours." The figure tilted her head, glowing softly in response. She reached out, and for the first time, Ethan felt a gentle warmth as her hand hovered near his. It was not physical contact as humans know it, but a connection that transcended touch, a silent, profound understanding. Over the next days, their friendship grew even deeper. Ethan taught her about human creativity, how to carve wood, arrange stones into patterns, and build simple tools. He showed her how to start a small fire safely, how to shape clay, and how to grow plants. She observed carefully, learning quickly, and responded in her own way, enhancing the patterns he created, adding glowing details, and introducing subtle ideas that expanded his own imagination. She, in turn, shared wonders from her world. She guided him to notice hidden patterns in the forest, the way sunlight reflected on leaves, how the stream moved over stones, and how animals left paths that told stories, if one knew how to read them. She introduced glowing seeds that grew into tiny, shimmering plants, changing color with light. Ethan marveled at these gifts, realizing that her knowledge of the natural world was vast, yet she was eager to learn from him as well. Their days became filled with shared discovery. They experimented with patterns of stones, sketches, and glowing lights, creating temporary art that told stories of the forest, the sky, and the unseen wonders around them. Ethan learned to interpret her glowing gestures as language, each pattern carrying meaning. He shared stories from his life, from the city he had left behind, and from the human world. She responded with patterns that reflected understanding, empathy, and sometimes even humor, a subtle glimmer of joy that Ethan felt deeply. One evening, a soft rain fell over the forest. Ethan and the figure stood under the canopy of trees, watching raindrops ripple through the stream and glisten on the leaves. He held out a carved bird, a gift of human creativity. She extended a glowing hand toward it. And for a moment, the light from her fingertips seemed to flow into the wood, making it shimmer as though alive. Ethan felt awe and gratitude. This was more than friendship. It was a meeting of minds and hearts across worlds. As autumn deepened, Ethan realized he had grown in ways he could never have imagined. He noticed details in the forest he had once overlooked: the rhythm of the wind, the colors of moss, the subtle sounds of nocturnal animals. He had learned patience, observation, and empathy, not only toward the figure but toward the forest and all its inhabitants. The cabin had become more than a home. It had become a laboratory of understanding, curiosity, and shared experience. One clear night, the stars stretched across the sky like silver threads. Ethan sat outside, looking upward, and she appeared beside him, glowing softly. He shared stories of constellations, of planets, and of the mysteries of the universe humans had discovered. She responded with patterns of light in the air, tracing shapes that seemed to complement the stars, forming connections between what Ethan knew and what she had observed. In that moment, he felt a unity between their worlds, a bridge built from curiosity, creativity, and trust. Ethan began to realize that this friendship had transformed him. He felt more alive, more connected, and more aware of the beauty and complexity of life. The figure had taught him to see not just with his eyes, but with his mind and heart. She had shown him that understanding could exist without words, that empathy and curiosity could cross boundaries that once seemed impossible. He felt honored that she had chosen to watch him, to share her knowledge, and to learn from him in return. The forest itself seemed to recognize their bond. Animals moved more freely around them, the wind carried gentle melodies, and the light seemed to shimmer in harmony with their interactions. Ethan realized that friendship, even across species, could create a harmony that touched everything around it. Each day brought new lessons, new surprises, and new opportunities to explore together. One morning, Ethan found a new gift. A small, glowing plant that pulsed gently with light. He held it carefully, understanding that it was a symbol of trust and connection. He placed it in the center of the clearing, arranging stones around it in a spiral. The figure appeared, observing the arrangement, then extended her glowing hand toward it. The plant seemed to react, glowing brighter, and Ethan felt a warmth that conveyed understanding, recognition, and joy. He realized that through these interactions, both of them had grown. He had learned patience, empathy, and the value of curiosity. She had learned about human creativity, emotion, and the power of observation. Together, they had created a space where two worlds could meet, where understanding and friendship transcended words and physical barriers. It was a testament to the power of connection, the beauty of learning from one another, and the extraordinary qualities of humans: ingenuity, creativity, and empathy. Time passed, and Ethan knew that eventually, she might leave. Her world had duties and places he could not reach. Yet, he no longer feared solitude. He understood that connection did not always require presence. Trust, understanding, and shared curiosity could persist across distance and time. And even if she left, he knew the forest would carry the lessons they had shared, the patterns they had created, and the bond that had formed between them. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Ethan left a final gift for her: a carved tree, symbolizing growth, friendship, and the connection between their worlds. She appeared, her glow soft and gentle, and Ethan stepped back, feeling both joy and sadness. For a long moment, they simply observed one another, communicating through patterns, gestures, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Then, with a gentle pulse of light, she moved toward the forest, fading slowly among the trees. Ethan watched until the glow disappeared completely, leaving the forest quiet once more. But he did not feel lonely. He felt enriched, inspired, and grateful. Their friendship had shown him that humans possessed extraordinary qualities: the ability to create, to empathize, to learn, and to connect even across worlds. Ethan returned to his cabin, the carved tree resting in the clearing as a reminder of their bond. He tended to his garden, sketched, and observed the forest with renewed wonder. Each day carried the possibility of discovery, and he carried the knowledge that the universe was full of beings capable of understanding, friendship, and curiosity. He knew now that living alone did not mean being lonely. It meant having the space to grow, to observe, and to welcome extraordinary connections when they appeared. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant song of the stream, Ethan smiled. The forest had taught him lessons that extended beyond solitude, beyond fear, and beyond words. Humanity, he realized, had a unique gift: the capacity to wonder, to create, to empathize, and to form connections that transcended boundaries, species, and worlds. And in that quiet understanding, Ethan felt a profound sense of joy. Knowing that he had experienced something truly extraordinary, he closed his eyes. The memories of glowing lights, patterns in the soil, and the gentle presence of his friend filling his mind. The woods were no longer just a home, they were a place of magic, learning, and connection. And in the heart of the forest, Ethan understood that the universe was wide and full of possibility. But it was humanity's empathy, creativity, and curiosity that made such wonder possible. He drifted to sleep, carrying with him the light of friendship, the joy of discovery, and the unshakable belief that even in the quietest corners of the world, connection and understanding could flourish.